Tea, Brits' favorite drink.
You have a cup of tea.
Will you apologise for your
Would you
comment?
like a cup of tea?
Do
Would
you
you like a
regret-
cup of
do
tea?
you-
Because I have nothing to say about this matter except offer you some tea.
But, no one in hindsight knew that tea will create a conflict that will set the motion for the independence of America. From a colony to an independent country.
This meeting can do nothing further to save the country.
Ignition sequence start. 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. All engine running. Liftoff.
This whole event rose from the conflict of no taxation without representation, that the British Parliament has no authority to tax the colonial Americans without any elected representative. Also, the evil of all British East Company was bleeding left and right. In the 17th century, Brits were developing a taste for tea. Imports start from China. The East India Company did not directly sell their tea to the colonies, but through a wholesale auction process to British firms, who resold it to colonial merchants. The East India Company was losing £400,000 per year because the tea sold was expensive due to taxes. On the other hand, the tea import into Dutch Republic was not taxed, meaning the Dutch tea was available at a cheaper price. Because of it, the Dutch tea was smuggled into colonial America in huge quantity. The British government passed the Indemnity Act, which gave a 25% refund on tax paid during export to colonies. But to offset the loss, the Townshend Revenue Act was passed, which laid a tax on tea consumption in the colonies. Rather than stopping the smuggling, the dubious Parliament renewed the dispute of its authority to tax the colonies. The Indemnity Act expired in 1772. A new act was passed that reduces the refund, restored taxes within British, and retained the Townshend duty. As the prices went up, the sales plummeted for EIC. For this reason and other, East India Company were in deep waters with the Bengal famine of 1770 driving the company on the verge of bankruptcy. The Tea Act of 1773 was passed to help the East India Company. It allows EIC to sell directly to the colonies for the first time through hired colonial merchants. The Townshend duty was retained amid strong opposition. The tea can now be sold cheaply, but fearing the opposition of Townshend duty, EIC sought to pay tax in England or after the tea was sold, but the effort to hide the tax was unsuccessful. In September to October 1773, 7 ships bound for colonial America bringing £600,000 of tea. Americans learned of the Tea Act while the ships were en route. The Sons of Liberty raised awareness and tried to convince the merchants to resign. This whole movement was not about high taxes, but the main concern was no taxation without representation. The colonial merchants and smugglers played a part in the protest because the Tea Act made the British tea cheaper. Many fear that the tea-created monopoly would further grant the government monopoly over more things. In everywhere except Boston, official merchants resigned. But there was a standoff in Boston where Governor Hutchinson convinced merchants, 2 of whom were being his sons, not to back down. When the ship arrived at port, Samuel Adams called a meeting at Faneuil Hall. But due to the large crowd, the meeting was moved to Old South Meeting House. A resolution was passed for the ship to return without paying duty, and 25 men were assigned to prevent the tea from unload. If the duty was not paid within 20 days, the customs could confiscate the items. On the last date of the deadline, tensions were to mount as more ships arrived.
Be advised, we have a visual on enemy paratroopers at grid Honda uniform 259er, 119er. I don't know, we're onto them. Break.
6,000 to 7,000 people out of a city with a population of 15,000 gathered around the Old South Meeting House after reports of the governor refusing to returning the ship. Adams said,
"This meeting can do nothing further to save the country."
This was a signal to begin the party, but according to eyewitness, people start leaving 10 to 15 minutes after the signal. And Adam tried to stop them because the meeting was not over. As things got out of hands, a group of around 30 to 130 men with some symbolically dressed in Mohawk costume, boarded the 3 ships and dumped all the tea into the sea over the course of 3 hours. The damage was worth £9,659 or $1,700,000 in today's money. It is unclear whether Samuel Adams planned this party, but he quickly defends it, terming it as an act of last resort to save their constitutional rights. The British government responded by closing the port of Boston and putting the Intolerable Act. The colonial people saw the laws as a human right and constitutional violation. This united the Americans, solidified by the First Continental Congress in September 1774. In 1778 the British government repealed the tax on tea, but it was simply too late.